No, I'm not wearing glasses. I've had surgery over the past couple of weeks, cataract surgery, and with the lasers and that, I now have distant vision. I don't even have to use glasses when I drive, and that's absolutely amazing. I've had to wear glasses most of my life, well over 50-some years now. Yeah, I'm being generous to myself. And wow, it's great. It's really wonderful. I still have to wear them for close-up reading, but this Bible that I use, this complete Jewish Bible I use for reading, is such a large print that I get by without doing that. So, Mishpatim, rulings or judgments, is the title of this parasha. It's 4 chapters long, and it's a fascinating portion. Many have thought that these laws that are listed are kind of like hodgepodge, but they're not. They connect, they fit together. They follow the 10 Commandments beautifully. If you know what you're reading, if you know what God is doing, if you realize the thematic connections, and that's what Tony Robinson is a master at, is finding these thematic connections. And hopefully we'll have time to be blessed with some of his insights from that. But for now, let's begin with Torah blessing. Baruch atah Yehovah, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzavanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed art thou, Jehovah our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with thy commandments and commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of the Torah. Shemot chapter 21, Exodus 21. And these are the rulings you are to present to them. If you purchase a Hebrew slave, he is to work 6 years. But in the 7th, he is to be given his freedom without having to pay anything. If he came single, he is to leave single. If he was married, when he came, his wife is to go out with him when he leaves. But if his master gave him a wife, as she bore him sons or daughters, then the wife and her children will belong to her master, and he will leave by himself. Nevertheless, if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, so I don't want to go free, then his master is to bring him before God. And there, at the door or doorpost, his master is to pierce his ear with an awl, and the man will be his slave for life. If a man sells his daughter as a slave, she's not to go free like the men slaves. If her master married her, but decides she no longer pleases him, then he is to allow her to be redeemed. He is not allowed to sell her to a foreign people because he has treated her unfairly. If he has her marry his son, then he is to treat her like a daughter. If he marries another wife, he's not to reduce her food, clothing, or marital rights. If he fails to provide her with these 3 things, she is to be given her freedom without having to pay anything. Whoever attacks a person and causes his death must be put to death. If it was not premeditated, but an act of God, then I will designate for you a place to which he can flee. But if someone willfully kills another, after deliberate planning, you are to take him even from my altar and put him to death. Whoever attacks his father or mother must be put to death. Whoever kidnaps someone must be put to death, regardless of whether he has already sold him or the person is found still in his possession. Whoever curses his father or mother must be put to death. If two people fight and one hits the other with a stone or with his fist, and the injured party doesn't die, but is confined to his bed, then, if he recovers enough to be able to walk around outside, even with a cane, the attacker will be free of liability, except to compensate him for his loss of time and take responsibility for his care until his recovery is complete. If a person beats his male or female slave with a stick so severely that he dies, he is to be punished. Except that if the slave lives for a day or two, he's not to be punished, since the slave is his property. If people are fighting with each other and happen to hurt a pregnant woman so badly that her unborn child dies, then, even if no other harm follows, he must be fined. He must pay the amount set by the woman's husband and confirmed by judges. But if any harm follows, then you are to give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. If a person hits his male or female slave's eye and destroys it, he must let him go free in compensation for his eye. If he knocks out his male or female slave's tooth, he must let him go free in compensation for his tooth. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox is to be stoned, and its flesh not eaten. But the owner of the ox will have no further liability. However, if the ox was in the habit of goring in the past, and the owner was warned, but did not confine it, so that it ended up killing a man or woman, then the ox is to be stoned, and its owner too is to be put to death. However, a ransom may be imposed on him, and the death penalty will be commuted if he pays the amount imposed. If the ox gores a son or daughter, the same rule applies. If the ox gores a male or female slave, its owner must give their master 12 ounces of silver, and the ox is to be stoned to death. If someone removes the cover from a cistern or digs one and fails to cover it, and an ox or donkey falls in, the owner of the cistern must make good the loss by compensating the animal's owner, but the dead animal will be his. If one person's ox hurts another's so that it dies, they are to sell the live ox and divide the revenue from the sale. And they are also to divide the dead animal. But if it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring in the past, and the owner did not confine it, he must pay ox for ox, but the dead animal will be his. If someone steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters or sells it, he is to pay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. Chapter 22. If a thief caught in the act of breaking in is beaten to death, it is not murder, unless it happens after sunrise, in which case it is murder. A thief must make restitution. So if he has nothing, he himself is to be sold to make good the loss from the theft. If what he stole is found alive in his possession, he is to pay double, no matter whether it is an ox, a donkey, or a sheep. If a person causes a field or vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his animal loose to graze in someone else's field, he is to make restitution from the best produce of his own field and vineyard. If a fire is started and spreads to thorns, so that stacked grain, standing grain, or a field is destroyed, the person who lit it must make restitution. If a person entrusts a neighbor with money or goods, and they are stolen from the trustee's house, then, if the thief is found, he must pay double. But if the thief is not found, then the trustee must state before God that he did not take the person's goods himself. In every case of dispute over ownership, whether of an ox, a donkey, a sheep, clothing, or any missing property, where one person says, "This is mine," both parties are to come before God. And the one whom God condemns must pay the other one double. If a person trusts a neighbor to look after a donkey, ox, sheep, or any animal, and it dies, is injured, or driven away unseen, then the neighbor's oath before Adonai that he has not taken the goods will settle the matter between them. The owner is to accept it without the neighbor making restitution. But if it was stolen from the neighbor, he must make restitution to the owner. If it was torn to pieces by an animal, the neighbor must bring it as evidence, and then he doesn't need to make good the loss. If someone borrows something from his neighbor and it gets injured or dies, with the owner not present, he must make restitution. If the owner was present, he need not make good the loss. If the owner hired it out, the loss is covered by the hiring fee. If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged to be married and sleeps with her, he must pay the bride price for her to be his wife. But if her father refuses to give her to him, he must pay a sum equivalent to the bride price for virgins. You're not to permit a sorceress to live. Whoever has sexual relations with an animal must be put to death. Anyone who sacrifices to any god other than Adonai alone is to be completely destroyed. You must neither wrong nor oppress a foreigner living among you. For you yourselves were foreigners in the land of Egypt. You are not to abuse any widow or orphan. If you do abuse them in any way, and they cry to me, I will certainly heed their cry. My anger will burn, and I will kill you with the sword. Your own wives will be widows, and your own children fatherless. If you loan money to one of my people who is poor, you're not to deal with him as you would a creditor, and you are not to charge him interest. If you take your neighbor's coat as collateral, you are to restore it to him by sundown. Because it is his only garment, he needs it to wrap his body. What else does he have in which to sleep? Moreover, if he cries out to me, I will listen, because I am compassionate. You are not to curse God, and you're not to curse a leader of your people. You're not to delay offering from your harvest of grain, olive oil, or wine. The firstborn of your sons you are to give to me. You are to do the same with your oxen and your sheep. It is to stay with its mother 7 days, and on the 8th day you are to give it to me. You are to be my specially separated people. Therefore, you are not to eat any flesh torn by wild animals in the countryside. Rather, throw it out for the dogs. Chapter 23. You are not to repeat false rumors. Do not join hands with the wicked by offering perjured testimony. Do not follow the crowd when it does what is wrong. And don't allow the popular view to sway you into offering testimony for any cause, if the effect will be to pervert justice. On the other hand, don't favor a person's lawsuit simply because he is poor. If you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey straying, you must return it to him. If you see the donkey, which belongs to someone who hates you, lying down helpless under its load, you're not to pass him by, but to go and help him free it. Do not deny anyone justice in his lawsuit simply because he is poor. Keep away from fraud and do not cause the death of the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. You are not to receive a bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of the righteous. You're not to oppress a foreigner, for you know how a foreigner feels, since you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. For 6 years you are to sow your land with seed and gather in its harvest. But the 7th year you are to let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor among your people can eat, and what they leave, the wild animals in the countryside can eat. Do the same with your vineyard and olive grove. For 6 days you are to work, but on the 7th day you are to rest, so that your ox and donkey can rest, and your slave girl's son and the foreigner be renewed. Pay attention to everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods, or even let them be heard crossing your lips. 3 times a year you are to observe a festival for me. Keep the festival of matzah for 7 days, as I ordered you. You are to eat matzah at the time determined in the month of Aviv, for it was in that month that you left Egypt. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. Next, the festival of harvest, the first fruits of your efforts sowing in the field. And last, the festival of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in from the fields the results of your efforts. 3 times a year, all your men are to appear before the Lord, Adonai. You are not to offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, nor is the fat of my festival to remain all night until morning. You are to bring the best first fruits of your land into the house of Adonai your God. You are not to boil a young animal in its mother's milk. I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you on the way and bring you to the place I have prepared. Pay attention to him. Listen to what he says and do not rebel against him, because he will not forgive any wrongdoing of yours, since my name resides in him. If you listen to what he says and do everything I tell you, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. When my angel goes ahead of you and brings you to the Amori, Hitti, Perizi, Canaani, Hivi, and Yevusi, I will make an end of them. You are not to worship their gods, serve them, or follow their practices. Rather, you are to demolish them completely and smash their standing stones to pieces. You are to serve Adonai your God, and he will bless your food and water. I will take sickness away from among you. In your land, your women will not miscarry or be barren, and you will live out the full span of your lives. I will send terror of me ahead of you, throwing into confusion all the people to whom you come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs on you. I will send hornets ahead of you to drive out the Hivi, Canaani, and the Hitti from before you. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, which would cause the land to become desolate and the wild animals too many for you. I will drive them out from before you gradually, until you have grown in numbers and can take possession of the land. I will set your boundaries from the sea of Suf to the sea of the Philistim, and from the desert to the Euphrates River. For I will hand the inhabitants of the land over to you, and you will drive them out before you. You are not to make a covenant with them or with their gods. They are not to live in your land. Otherwise, they will make you sin against me by ensnaring you to serve their gods. Chapter 24. To Moshe, Adonai said, come up to Adonai, you, Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, and 70 of the leaders of Israel. Prostrate yourselves at a distance, while Moshe alone approaches Adonai. The others are not to approach, and the people are not to go up with him. Moshe came and told the people everything Adonai had said, including all the rulings. The people answered with one voice, we will obey every word Adonai has spoken. Moshe wrote down all the words of Adonai. He rose early in the morning, built an altar at the base of the mountain, and set upright 12 large stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent the young men of the people of Israel to offer burnt offerings and sacrifice peace offerings of oxen to Adonai. Moshe took half of the blood and put it in basins. The other half of the blood he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it aloud so that the people could hear, and they responded, everything that Adonai has spoken, we will do and obey. Moshe took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant which Adonai has made with you in accordance with all these words. Moshe, Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, and 70 of the leaders went up, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a sapphire stone pavement, as clear as the sky itself. He did not reach out his hand against these notables of Israel. On the contrary, they saw God even as they were eating and drinking. Adonai said to Moshe, come up to me on the mountain and stay there. I will give you the stone tablets with the Torah and the mitzvot I have written on them, so that you can teach them. Moshe got up, also Yehoshua, his assistant. And Moshe went up onto the mountain of God. To the leaders he said, stay here for us until we come back to you. See, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a problem should turn to them. Moshe went up onto the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of Adonai stayed on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day, he called to Moshe out of the cloud. To the people of Israel, the glory of Adonai looked like a raging fire on top of the mountain. Moshe entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. He was on the mountain 40 days and nights. Before I open up for discussion and comments, I'd like for you to reflect on how often Egypt was mentioned. How often the fact that the people of Israel, the children of Israel, had been slaves in Egypt and had been freed, that had been in exile in Egypt, that they were to treat foreigners and even other slaves with respect because they had been slaves. They would provide justice for them no matter who they were. Even a slave could expect justice from Adonai. So, I have a question for you to reflect on. When I read those portions about Egypt, did you nod spiritually, mentally? Did you agree? Did you acknowledge that you have a personal connection that goes all the way back to that deliverance? That you too have been freed from Egypt? If not, you still have some growth. You still have the need of some spiritual growth in your life. And that's not unusual, because many of us were raised as Christians. Now, I'm not browbeating Christians here, okay? I'm just pointing out something. There is Jewish culture and there is Christian culture. And there are some common points of connection. And well, there should be. There should be many more than what there are. But due to the predominance of Christian culture, there is a replacement theology that relegates Judaism to the back seat. If even in the vehicle at all. Or what we might say on the back burner. So, what I'm saying is, if that is your thinking, well, you've got it backwards. It's the other way around. It's the other way around. So, those are the nations who identify with Yeshua and have come to God in faith and belief. Identify also with Yisrael because we have been grafted in. We are a part of Yisrael. Now, replacement theology wants you to believe that the church has replaced Israel. I'll just say that that is very poor theology and leave it at that. take a close look at it. So, if you take these words to heart, then you identify with Israel so that when they made that judgment, that pronouncement, we will do and obey, that was not just for those Jews then at that time delivered out of Egyptian bondage, but it was for all time, for the people of God, those blessed by God, those descendants of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Those patriarchs are our patriarchs too. Doesn't matter whether we were born or adopted into the family of God. It is one kingdom. So, okay. I guess I won't belabor that any more than I already have. So, what comments or questions do you have? We have some time.
Jeremiah chapter 30. I got one up here. I like the story about the slave that goes to his master. And his master has allowed him to marry a wife. In that whole story.
Although my eyes are a lot better than they've ever been in my life, my ears, unfortunately, you're doing okay. So, yeah, if you could hold it a little closer.
Is that better?
That's better, thank you.
Sorry about that. I like the story about the slave who goes to the master, whose master has been benevolent to him and allowed him to marry a wife and have children.
Yeah.
Now, once his, we don't, here in Western society, we don't have the concept of economy and how do you pay off debts that they do there, and how God arranged it that way. However, if a slave gets married during his period there and he is released, he can go free by himself. But he is not to go out with his wife and children. If he really loves his wife, he will go to his master and say, I love my wife, and I love my children, and I love you. You have benefited me, and I will serve you and my wife and my children for the rest of my life. It is very interesting that the apostles, when they read the Bibles, or their books, when they introduce themselves, a lot of times they will introduce themselves as bondservants to Yeshua. And Yeshua wants us to live as bondservants, not to be afraid of him, but in love, in recognizing that he has provided everything for us. He has provided our spouses and our children. Why would I go elsewhere?
I've been reflecting on this as well, because I remember this passage of Scripture. It says, perfect love casts out fear. All right? Perfect love casts out fear. And I used to apply that to myself, that I shouldn't be afraid because I love God, right? Okay, but it finally occurred to me that it says perfect love casts out fear. Well, I know who has perfect love, and it's not me. Thank you for that support. No, that's true. Yeah, I agree. Anybody that knows me, that's true. That's true. Amen. Right? But God is. And so the rabbis have talked a lot about this too, because the way it's structured. The previous parashah, we had the 10 Commandments. And this chapter affirms that this is the high watermark of Israel. This is the apex of the nation of Israel. It will never be this high until the return of the Messiah in the Acharit Harayim, in the last days. Right? We say, wait a minute, we think in terms of everything progresses. No, it was a digression. We're going to see a very steep digression about 40 days and nights. Right? But this covenant, first covenant with the nation of Israel, right? This covenant is the high mark. Even the leaders, dare I say, Sanhedrin, are having a fellowship meal with God on the mountain in His presence. And they're not struck dead or blind or whatever. This intimacy that God is celebrating with them, this perfect love that casts out fear, right? And there it is. But that's all going to change. There's going to be another covenant coming. So and that only because of a mediator. In this case, it'll be Moshe as the mediator. But that's another parashah, so we won't jump ahead to that one. But yeah, that's a great point that you're making about that. Because this here, even these rulings fit. You'll notice they fit in. The parashah starts with the slaves. A slave. The least. Yet even the least person is created in the image of God and has value and dignity and is loved by God. These are there for that protection. Now let's take it out. Why? Why is he a slave? Why is he a slave? They came out of Egypt with great wealth. Why is he a slave? What has happened here? So there's a lot of different reasons that can happen, but they're not good. None of them are good. That someone is so destitute, becomes so destitute, that they, or slavery, as even pointed out in this section, could be a result of a person's actions, because they incurred a debt that they could not pay, because they stole something. They were a thief. So there's different things that's here. So we have this person here, even this one story, we can try to say, what's going on here? And so this guy is now working as a slave. And he's going to give up his freedom. He's going to give up his freedom that God gave to him. And so he has a wife and children. Would he have had a wife and children before? I don't think so. But now, because he served a loving master and he was given a wife, and they had children, and so now he wants to stay in this because you know what? He's looking at his life and says, what I have now is much better than what I had before. Because I did not have the strength, the wisdom, the intelligence, the yatzer hara, the yatzer to remain free. Because I didn't have the discipline. It's better for me to have someone else tell me what to do. It's better for me to have a discipline applied upon me. Because that brings order to my life. Where all I was doing, I was in chaos. I was a thief I was disobedient. And I paid the price for that. So I can see there's the different ways of looking at this. I can see a lot of mercy coming into this situation as well. Okay, so.
I wanted to reinforce what you said about the replacement theology is not the way to go. When you read the Bible, it's clear if you read a lot, it's clear that you can see passages where God promises that his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was forever, and that they're alive now. For example, in Jeremiah chapters 31 through 33, you can see that God says basically, if you can change the way the sun and the moon and the earth rotates causing the day and night to occur, then you could change my covenant with David for there to be blessings for Israel forever. We have not seen all the blessings that God has already promised for Israel. For example, he promised to Abraham that land would be given in Genesis 12, and later in Genesis describes the parameters of that land. The land that's promised included all of modern Lebanon, all the way up to the Litani River in northern Lebanon, all of modern Syria, all the way over to the Euphrates River, and all the way south to the present extent of Israel as well. All that land is promised to Abraham and his descendants permanently. And in the necessity of the millennium that's coming, when Jesus reigns on earth with a rod of iron, will be to fulfill all those promises. That were given to Abraham in time, in our own sight, because we will be there. We will be resurrected. So at the end, you can see, especially at the end of chapter 33, that's noticed if you want to read it. But anyway, so I'm agreeing with you, Stevie. Replacement theology is not the way to go.
I see that. I think there's passages where Scripture says that God has this relationship with each one of us. He knows us infinitely well. He knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows us inside out, and he still loves us. But he knows us, and this idea that he says he can enable any one of us to stand. He can enable us to stand, and he said he will. He will. We will stand. So, perfect love casts out fear. So, we don't know what we may face in the years ahead. days ahead, whatever. Yeah, but he will enable us to stand, and he will give us exactly what we need when we need it. All right? So, and you said something as well as far as this land. God gave a land grant to the descendants of Abraham. Now, was there a time limit on that? No. That land grant is still in effect. And so for those of us who hold to the scripture that says, those who bless Yisrael will be blessed, and those who curse Yisrael will be cursed. That is the eternal promise of God, and it applies no matter who you are or who or what you think your relationship is with God and to God. Those are his words. That is his promise. So we should know who we need to stand with, regardless of what our understanding of their relationship with God is. We're responsible for our relationship with God. God is smarter than we are, and he's big enough to take care of himself. We don't have to be gatekeepers for God and his temple. Okay. And I think we're almost out of time here.
Are we out of time? Well, he is telling the children of Israel he's going to be taking them up against all these people. And coming up this month, we are going to be celebrating Purim. I think Father is going to be putting us in situations that look bleak and unsolvable, but he's doing it for his glory and our faith. And so our history is prophecy, and when things look bleak, he has reached out with a mighty hand, and he's going to rescue us like his bride, like a bridegroom will rescue his bride. And so I like it that they command us to remember Purim, because when hope is lost, he turns it around and rescues us.
All things will be made new. There's a reckoning coming. Right.
I just had a couple comments to this. It's interesting, though, that this parsha, this parashat of the Torah, is post the Ten Commandments, which the Ten Commandments, as Yeshua said when he was asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he says, one, you love Yahweh your God with all your heart and soul, and then love your neighbor as yourself. This Torah portion is covering those elements of loving your neighbor as yourself. So one must ask, well, that was not done away with. These instructions were given because we do need to be told how to love, even to serve our, people who work for us, or these are all laws that protect them, kind of like a OSHA. So that was just my little 2 cents on it, because, the Ten Commandments is hinged upon those two things of, one, loving Yahweh, then loving your neighbor. And that this parashat highlights all that. And then also what I found interesting in verse 19, it is I think it was in chapter 23. It says, "The choice first fruits of your soil," and I've always struggled with this one, is the house of your Yahweh your God. Then you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Okay. In the Jewish community, they've taken this to the point to where they've done complete separation from cheese and milk. Do I think that was the context of what Yahweh was instructing? No, I don't. I think the very context of the structure is because it was shameful to take a child that a mother birthed, even in the animal reign, and boil it in the very elements what was to give it life. You're killing it. So, I mean, that's a very principle that can be applied today. The very things that was meant to give life is destroying it. So that was just my 2 cents, my commentary on that. And then I think it was, and you are to love Yahweh your God. You shall serve Yahweh your God, and he will bless your bread and your water. And then at the end, and I will remove sickness from your midst. So I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for the sickness to
Amen.
be removed
Yeah.
from our midst.
Thank you,
I
Mike.
think when we see that, we recognize we're walking in how he is instructed.
There are others that would like to make comments, but we are out of time. So but you can bring them to me, or I'll be glad to discuss any other questions or comments that you have. There was a lot that we could have done with this portion. There's a lot here, so that's good. Stimulate that thinking together. Let's close with a blessing. Great peace have those who love your Torah. Nothing can make them stumble. Psalm 119, verse 165. Shabbat Shalom.